What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. I just like to recap things when I start the discussion each time we meet. We've gone through the 12 steps, and we looked at how the steps help us discover and achieve emotional sobriety in our life. All those videos are posted on a YouTube channel that Patrick Newman has created for us, as well as Patrick posts the first half an hour or so before we get into the discussion or open up the discussion. And those recent videos are also posted. Patrick is a volunteer for doing that, but he does appreciate if you want to make a donation to support him, because this is also what he does for a living. That information is in the chat, I believe. So after we finished the 12 steps, I started to focus on differentiation, because I feel that it gives us just provides a wonderful framework to think about what is happening for us as we discover and achieve emotional sobriety in our life. So past 7 or 8 weeks now, we've been exploring differentiation. And the last several weeks, I've taken the focus from going from a more theoretical discussion to a more practical. And we've looked at, well, what does it mean to communicate with a consciousness that's informed by being differentiated? So we've been doing that. But it struck me tonight, as I prepared for this, is I think I have been unintentionally misleading you. And I want to clean that up tonight. Now, what do I mean by that? Before you decide to throw a mutiny and tar and feather me, I know Howard's thinking about that right now. Howard, behave yourself. Stop it, Howard, stop it. I don't want to set up the idea that if we achieve emotional sobriety, that everything is just going to work out for us, that we're not going to have any struggle or any conflict in our life. Because that's not the case. That's not what emotional sobriety looks like. You see, if that's the idea that I've been giving you, I apologize for it, because I don't intend that. You see, I rather like to think of emotional sobriety is giving you a way of meeting struggle and conflict where you can use it to forge a better experience in your life, where you can use it to grow yourself into who you can be. So emotional sobriety is not a spiritual bypass in any way. And if I've kind of given that meaning, I am so sorry for it, because we're not bypassing anything. We want to go to the heart of the matter. We want to step into the fire, not outside of it. And we want to learn how to deal with the tension and conflict that arises through our natural discourse and interaction with one another. Now, I've also been reflecting on this whole idea of emotional dependency. And I think the other thing that's kind of happened here is that once again, my thoughts have evolved, thankfully so, I hope in a good way, is that I used to look at the emotional dependence in more of a negative way. Is like, this is pathological that we're this dependent on each other. And I think that's been wrong. I don't think it's pathological. You see, I think our first experience in life was to have this complete dependence on our environment for support. So what that did is it created this experience that when we had a desire, it was automatically fulfilled, and now we were calm. That happened inside mother's womb. As soon as we needed some kind of nourishment or something happened, we had an experience that took care of it. So that idea continued on when we were born. So this idea that somehow the environment is going to give me everything I need without me even having to participate in it, right? The umbilical cord did this stuff automatically. I was just hooked up, baby. Now, I think that idea becomes a fantasy after we start to mature in life, and we never mature it. But it doesn't mean that we're wrong. It just means that we're stuck at a certain early phase in our development. So if in any way I've made any of you feel shame about that, I apologize for that. I don't intend to do that, or now I realize how wrong it would be to do that. Our dependency is not to be ashamed about. It's to be acknowledged and faced as part of our development. And when we can own that, then we can start moving on. So here is the formula, how we're all wired. We start out with some desire. Once that desire is fulfilled, now we become calm and available for the next desire to surface. That's the basic formula that we are wired with in our life. You can call it God's inspiration or whatever you want to call it. But see, life is never that simple, especially as we develop and as we separate from our mother's womb and that umbilical cord gets cut. Now a desire comes up, and because of the way life is, that we may not be able to be fulfilled immediately. Even the child that wants to, let's say, have mom feed her, right? To go suckle on her mother's breast, right? Well, mom may not be interested. She may be doing the laundry. So now the child has this need. Mom's not available to fulfill it. And there's a conflict and a struggle that ensues. Now, at that point in time, the only way the child can struggle with, hey, I want you to join me over here and fulfill my needs, is to start crying, right? Or to be fussy or to whine or whatever it is. And then mom will tune into that and meet the child's needs. And then the child will be fulfilled, and the child will now be in a place of calmness because that child's needs are fulfilled. But later on in our relationships with each other, that desire for union and separateness becomes the basis for what, let me say it another way. Our desire is linked to our need to connect, our need for union, or our need for separation and separateness. Now, in our relationships, when we enter a relationship with someone, sometimes we may be on the same page, but not often. We're going to be out of sync, and that's okay. You've heard me say many times, trouble does not mean something's wrong. Trouble means something's right, because we're going to have these differences. So my need for union, you may be wanting to be separate at that point in time. Well, how do we deal with that difference? How do we now struggle with that together? That's where emotional sobriety comes in. It's how we meet that struggle, how we deal with that conflict, how we approach it. And when we approach it from a place of differentiation, we do not blame the other person for not meeting our needs. We find a way to talk to them about it and struggle with it to see if we can get to that place of fulfillment. Now, some of the things we've been talking about is how to express ourselves, how to be able to deliver our message in a way where we are clear about what we desire, what we would like, and to be able to talk about it in a way of trying to get our desire fulfilled, how to get our needs met, instead of expecting that if someone loves me, they're just going to figure this out and meet my needs automatically. Once again, I want to go back in the womb, right? Please just take care of me. I don't want to grow up. I don't want to grow up. But in our culture, conflict and struggle are looked at so negatively. We have a phobia. We don't want to feel the discomfort. We don't want to feel the discomfort of the struggle, because it brings up a lot of different things, because, you know, how we're going to experience that conflict is going to be how that conflict was dealt with in our families. And was conflict met in a way where people were respected and dealt with? Or was conflict met in a way where people were dismissed, put down, silenced? And so now we enter into relationships, you know, with whatever capacity that has developed, and it's never enough. And if we don't have those tools, we're going to avoid those things, and we're not going to know how to meet the conflict, or we're going to try to dismiss it when it comes up. And when we are doing that, we are now depriving ourselves in our relationship of the very thing that's going to grow us and is going to help us become what we can be, and for the relationship to be able to realize its full potential. So what we've been talking about is how to meet those differences, how to struggle with my desire when fulfillment is not readily available, how to talk about that. But the one thing that I haven't said is that there's another formula that needs to be done. So the first one, remember, is if I had a whiteboard, I'd be writing on the whiteboard, and I do have a whiteboard, but I'm unable to write very well with my cursor yet on it. So the first one is desire, fulfillment, and calmness, right? That's the path, right? That's how we're hardwired to move. Then life happens, and now it becomes desire, conflict, struggle. And if that conflict and struggle are met in the right way, it leads to fulfillment and calmness, and we're ready for what's next. But sometimes our conflict and struggle does not lead to fulfillment. And so now the process unfolds in a very different way. Fulfillment is now replaced with grief. So it goes desire, conflict, struggle, grief, and then calmness. Just as we avoid conflict and struggle, so too do we avoid feeling our disappointment and feeling our grief. And when we generate all these rules that I'm now beginning to believe are rules to avoid that conflict and struggle, and to avoid the grief that will come if we can't get our needs met, we fill in that space with all of these unenforceable rules, because we're trying to set up a situation where we're just going to get our needs met all the time. In one way, these rules are constructing an umbilical cord that we're trying to hook up to other people so that they just feed us and give us what we want without the conflict and struggle, or without us needing to grieve. Well, that's ridiculous, right? We've created this impossible situation. Bill called it that, and it's an impossible way of life in his letter. Well, of course it is. You can't live that way. That's not real. That's not what happens in our living rooms. That's not what happens in our bedrooms. So I'm hoping that bringing this in is going to ground us again, right? Ground us in that emotional sobriety is not about being okay. It's about getting to okay. That's what emotional sobriety is about. It's about dealing with when things aren't okay. It's about letting go of this idea that life should just somehow be easy and this stuff should just happen. And if you loved me, of course, you just know what I want even before I ask. That's nonsense. All of that. And that's what I'm saying to you. We've filled in all of these holes in our development. Holes meaning Holes. All of these areas that we have not developed, we've filled in those spaces with these rules that have become the crutches that we've relied on to get our needs met. And Bill does a great way of saying what those expectations do to relationships. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. So I'm hoping that this is going to recenter us, get us focused on what emotional sobriety is, and that it's about getting down in the trenches, man, and getting dirty, getting the dirt underneath your fingernails. It's about sobbing and letting the snot run down your nose when you need to. It's about sometimes screaming until you figure out what's really going on underneath that pain that you're feeling. It's about, having faith that if you stay pressed up against what you're experiencing and keep searching for the right words, that's going to help set you free towards helping you get your needs met, or to grieve if you can't. That's what life is. Emotional sobriety is about the tools of living, the tools that none of us have ever really received in our lives. Next week, we're going to be talking about how to listen to someone from a differentiated place and how to encourage this struggle and conflict that I'm talking about and meet it in a good way. After that, we are now going to shift our discussion from differentiation to self-esteem. And Roger, who studied with Dr. Nathaniel Brandon, and Dr. Brandon is the person's concepts of self-esteem that we're going to be studying and talking about together. Roger is going to take the lead in taking us through the 6 pillars of self-esteem and how those pillars relate to emotional sobriety. And Tom and I will be the discussants of that. So for tonight, this is the message I wanted to carry to you and to get you guys to think about is emotional sobriety is welcoming and engaging with that conflict and struggle and welcoming grief when it's necessary. So let me invite Roger and Tom in, see what they'd like to say about that, if anything. And if Herb is here, is invite Herb as well.
All right. Herb, are you with us?
No Herb this evening.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
No Herb today. He has gone away. I'm sorry. Was my mic on? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I appreciate, Alan, that you're just trying to take all of my newly achieved Buddhahood right out of me right here, man. I'm profoundly disillusioned at this moment, because I thought if I just learned enough about emotional sobriety, I would be nothing but peace, goodness, and light, man. And so, well, you said it. I have to grieve right now, Alan. I have to process my disappointment, right? I have to process my disappointment. No, I really do appreciate, man, that you're aware of, first of all, the potential for shaming, right? It's like, and I at times will chime in going, any of these things we talk about can easily be turned into shoulds, right? You've heard me say that many times, and they can. And with those shoulds, we start to lose track of our center and what we most desire. Again, I always feel a little bit of a need to remind ourselves that sometimes what my desire is to be of value to you. And I always want to include that relationship piece. I know you always do include it, Al, but I just want to make it explicit that sequence of desire and then, you know, somebody gives me what I need, or I do something to get what I need, and then calmness or fulfillment happens. Although, as you say, if we're not infants with our mother right there, ready to take care of each of our needs, it's really much more complicated than that. So I appreciate that you're pointing to that complexity. The other thing I wanted to share is, how do we deal with the grief, and how do we avoid dealing with disappointment? And that's where I think, for me, what I want to do with that a lot of the time is externalize. I want to blame the other person, right? Whoever I think is supposed to meet that need because of the unwritten contract that we're friends, or we're husband and wife, or boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever that unwritten contract is. I avoid my grief by wanting to get blameful, either toward myself or others, by wanting to point the finger at somebody else, because then I don't have to talk about my disappointment. I don't have to talk about the part of me that doesn't like the idea that some of my needs are not going to be met when I want them to be met, right? They're not going to be met by the person I would most like to meet them. And as I've mentioned before, I can do pretty well with a lot of this emotional sobriety stuff, or the self-esteem stuff we'll talk about in a couple of weeks, unless the need I'm connected with is really powerful, right? Unless the need I'm in touch with is really powerful. That's when I tend, the whole thing tends to unravel for me, because I'm not going to be nearly as accepting of my failed efforts to get what I need, or my ideas about efforts other people are supposed to be making to get what I need. My acceptance level for all of that drops down dramatically when I'm connected to something that really has some urgency about it for me, really feels important to me. And I know you and I and Tom and others in the group tonight who work with people for a living, we see how this plays out. If we had a childhood where our needs were characteristically not met, especially at an emotional level, that tends to manifest in a couple of different ways in our adult relationships. Either we pretend like we have no needs, so we're very isolated, or we are very needy and tend to make what? A lot of demands on other people, or we swing back and forth between those two modes. And that's just one of the ways that our childhood experience tends to manifest itself in our adult experience. So I'll just finish by saying, Al, I really appreciate that you want to move away, because I think it's totally the way to look at it, from pathologizing, a high level of need, from looking at that as something that's really, in a certain sense, bad for us. It's part of an evolutionary process. As you guys know, I also, almost every time we use the word need, I am, in my mind, I put unhealthy need, because I think needs are healthy and normal at a certain level. And I know you guys don't disagree with that we're incredibly dependent, not just at the level of I didn't make the clothes I wear and I didn't grow the food that I eat, but a certain level of need to me is a normal thing. It's involved with the ability to receive, but it's when that need becomes excessive. It's when that need becomes too powerful. That's where the damage gets done. So I also don't want to pathologize need, in addition to not pathologizing, but I guess it's two ways of saying the same thing: dependency, right? So that's my spiel for tonight. Tom, anything you want to add?
Well, I'll just take off on the need thing, because I think that I had a group years ago that actually had they had a motion that went with whenever they would say the word need, they would go need, and it's like needy, and we talk so much about how what a negative connotation that word has, and that basically, independence is not the lack of need. And independence is someone who is really good at identifying needs and very resourceful at getting needs met, both from within themselves and using resources from outside. So yeah, I like the fact that what you're saying, Alan, in terms of bringing it back around, dealing with that disappointment, because every time the disappointment, what it does is I have this just the strangeness of my mind, but it's like wherever I go in this place, and then it brings me right back to this one spot, and I go, haven't I been here before? And the one spot is the shortest version of the Serenity Prayer that I can think of is well, the shortest version is fuck it, but it's like the next to shortest version is the only thing I can change is me. And it's like the idea, and I want to just add this piece that the place where our needs become too much is ironically because we've been ignoring our needs, by waiting for other people to meet them, or by not becoming experts at identifying our needs. We really have to we not only have to accept our needs, we need to really embrace the fact that that's the basis of what independence is recognizing our needs and becoming resourceful at getting those things met. And only we can do that. And as long as we're expecting, people to do that consciously or unconsciously, then we're out of sync with emotional sobriety. And I like the idea that we're not talking about we're headed someplace, some destination of emotional sobriety. It's just like we're just not at our center. We're not the emotional sobriety piece, whatever you want to call it, maturity runs right down the center of us. And when we're firing on all cylinders, when we're having a good day and we're getting some of this stuff right, then we feel congruent. We feel connected to ourselves. And that's what emotional sobriety is. Amen.
Amen.
Here's my cat's tail.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved. The forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. The first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. We're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.